Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you've joined me today. And we are in Genesis chapter 6 through 9. And so let's go ahead and let's say a word of prayer and we'll get started. Father God, thank you so much for loving us beyond our understanding. And Lord, I just pray that today that you would open eyes and hearts to your word. And Lord, may we learn something new about you and about who we are in you. Lord, I pray you'd increase our faith and give us a deeper understanding of even the things that that we didn't even know we might have had questions about. Or Lord, I pray you'd answer questions that maybe our kids have. Or, Lord, I just pray you'd use today for your glory and your honor. In Jesus' precious name, amen. Okay, so today we are starting in chapter 6 of Genesis. And because it's 6, 7, 8, 9, I'm not going to read all of the chapters. I'm going to kind of move around. So go ahead and have your word with you if you would like. And if not, you can just go ahead and listen to us reading along. But we're going to start in chapter 6 at verse 5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made the human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on the earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. Okay, so if you're in a small group, you're going to be talking about the idea of regret. I'm going to go ahead and touch here just for a second. I don't want to steal any of you guys' thunder, but I do want to make sure that those who aren't in small groups understand. This idea of God regretting something, it makes us kind of wonder, well, did God know ahead of time that they were going to be this corrupted? Did he, oh, wow, I wish I hadn't done that. That's kind of gives all kinds of ideas and questions about the heart of God and something that might have surprised him in some way. But the idea of regret here is that God turned his back on. Remember when we talk about when I repent of something, whenever I am, that means I'm going to stop doing it. I'm going to turn my back on it. And so this idea of God regretting, and it says it twice right here in the first part of this, that God regretted or he repented of them. He turned his back on them, and he said, I'm no longer going to protect them from their own evil ways, and I'm going to go ahead and destroy the planet. And I think that it's important to understand that that is the idea, not, oh, rats, I didn't know that was coming. It was I'm turning my back on them. They have come to this full violence that is unquenchable. When you think about how old they were living, and we're going to get to how that would even be possible, but when you think about how old they were, can you think about the very most wicked people that you know, the most evil that we've ever seen on television, or that have been arrested or some horrible crime? Can you imagine that kind of person and those kinds of people living to be 600 years old? What kind of wickedness could they come up with? What kind of wickedness do we come up with when people live to only be 80, 90, 100? And they can get their full horribleness out by the time they're 50. But can you imagine if they could live to be hundreds? So the entire culture had become this idea of totally corrupted. And so I think it's important to understand that God, it wasn't a shock to him, but that he turned his back on them. Okay. I also think that it's a beautiful thing that Noah is an incredible example of God's redemption, and we're going to continue with that idea. But God chose one man, and one man actually served him, and it was one man who saved the entire human race and the animal races and the animal kinds, and how God did that was a beautiful thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's keep on reading. So make yourself, I'm starting at verse 14 of chapter 6. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you're to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, leaving below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark and make the lower, middle, and upper decks. I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature that has the breath of life in it, everything on earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark. You and your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. You're to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, and every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You're to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and stored away as food for you and for them. Noah did everything just as God commanded, and the Lord then said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds of life throughout the earth. 7 days from now I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Okay. There are some really great statistics here that I have found and seen for many years, but a lot of them are from In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for the Creator and the Flood. If you want to buy that resource or any other resources, you can go to the BibleJourney.live, and I've got those on there. You can just go find them yourself. But so how big actually was the ark? All this cubit idea. It was about 450 to 550 feet long, 75 to 90 feet wide, 45 to 55 feet high, and they finished off the roof. God told them to finish off the roof within 18 inches. So you had 18 inches that all the way around. So there was ventilation. There was just a window that was it was underneath the eave of the ark, but it wasn't completely finished off there. So they had air coming in there. 3 decks. So it was about 1.5 football fields long, about half a football field wide, and about 4 stories tall. So that kind of gives you an idea of the width and breadth of it. So what would its capacity have been? So you say, how could he have gotten all the animals on? Well, if you think about the different kinds of animals we have and the changes that can happen within a species or within a genera, it's important to remember that genetically, all of the animals that we have today, all the different kinds of animals we have, are representative of those original flood animals. So Noah wouldn't have had to have had 14, 75, 110 different kinds of dogs. There was a dog kind. There was the flood dog. So all of the dogs that we still see on the planet today came from that one couple, that one pair of dogs. Now, whenever we see the different kinds of dogs that we have today, in order for a dog to change its look, in order for something to change its size, its color, the kind of hair that it has, all of that is a subtraction of genetic information. Anytime that you subtract information from an animal, then it can no longer produce something. So if you want a short-haired, curly-haired dog, genetically you would breed it with short-haired, curly-haired dogs so that it could no longer produce a long-haired dog in its generations below. So it's a matter of subtracting information, not adding information. Anytime that scientists or by an anomaly, DNA information is added to something, it becomes handicapped, it has some sort of a malady, it may not be able to reproduce. We see that with trisomy babies. Those are Down syndrome babies, or those with other ailments of the trisomy nature, meaning that they have too much DNA. DNA has been added in, and so it causes a handicap. And anytime you have animals that you try to add in information, like you take a horse and a mule and you create a donkey. Is that right? Or is it a donkey and a horse and you create a mule? Anyway, somebody's going to have to write me and say it's this way. That offspring cannot reproduce. There's a handicap in it. And so the only thing that Noah had to take with him was a kind of bovine, or this kind of dog, this kind of, animal that would be of its same kind. And then what we have left today are any of the offspring of that original flood type of animal. The Morgan horse, for example, how quickly can a certain kind of animal be made from the kinds of animals? The Morgan horse actually started, there's a huge international Morgan horse show, and it's this amazing horse actually came about around the time of the American Revolution, and the very first horse was owned by a man whose last name was Morgan, and he could pull, and yet he was fast, and so then they started breeding him to create all the Morgan horses that we have today. So you have an international animal now that actually competes, and from the American Revolution. So you have very quickly, can we have different kinds of specific animals in a certain genera. So whenever you talk about how many animals did he need to bring onto the ark in order for everything we have today, or that we know that have gone extinct, that of those animals, that how many animals would there have been to represent what we have on the planet right now? So could they have all fit in the ark? That's where I'm going with this. So let me see this. Of the animals we have today, this is how many mammals. We have 7,428 mammals, 4,602 birds, and 3,724 reptiles. And then, of course, the fish and stuff could just go ahead and stay in the sea. Well, how many animals would that have been? That would have been 15,754. You double that, that would be 31,508 specific animals if it was just the male and female. Now, some of those are going to have by 7, so there's going to be 14 of those instead of just 2. But what would the ark's capacity have been when you talk about the 3 different stories and you talk about the width and the breadth and the size of those animals? The capacity of the ark would have been 125,280. The amount of animals that would have needed to have been on the ark in order for all the animals to be represented that we now have is only 31,000. So there would have been plenty of room on the ark to represent all of the animals that we know on this planet today, and plus enough room for all of the food that they would have needed for their trip. So when we say, well, this isn't possible, this is ridiculous, actually, according to the measurements and according to what we understand, what we have left over after the flood, it would have been possible. Okay, so it says that all kinds, in 7 days from now, I'll send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, where did we go? And they all came, and I love it that they all came to Noah. He didn't have to go try to find them all. They all came to him. Have you ever, I don't know if any of you guys have ever been when there's going to be a bad storm, and how the animals react if you're out in a field or if you have cattle or horses, and the animals do react to what's going to be happening in the weather. And you can tell that something's up because of the way the animals behave. So that's kind of just a leftover remnant of, oh, they probably would have gone to wherever the inclination of the heart of God put into them to go, because they do have reaction when it comes to bad weather. Okay, start at verse 9. Male and female came to Noah and entered the ark as God had commanded Noah. And after the 7 days, the floodwaters came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, it's very important to notice here that there's not just one source of water. There's 2 sources of water. The first source, and probably the greatest source, was the springs of the great deep burst forth with the floodgates of the heavens were open. Okay, so what does all of that mean? Well, if we go back to the creation story, we're going to get kind of an indication of that. So go on back to Genesis chapter 1, verse, I've got to take my glasses back off, sorry about that. Verse 6, and God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. And the vault, and God called the vault sky, and there was evening and there was morning the 2nd day. And let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. Okay, so here we have, apparently in the Genesis story, it says that there was some water above the vault of the sky. which would have been this water that came down. And it hadn't rained, because it goes ahead and says later on in Genesis that there had been no rain on the earth, but the earth was watered by the dew that came up. Why would all of that have been important to understand? Well, if you had the waters were gathered all to one place and then dry ground appeared, the idea would be that there was actually a crust over most of the water that was on the planet at that point. Because if you have a large body of water, it's going to create weather. It's going to create rain. It's going to evaporate. The nature of the way that God created the molecular structure of water is that it's going to evaporate. It's going to rain. It's going to come down. But unless that water is under the crust, so to think that most of the water on the planet was underneath the crust of the earth, then whenever the waters of the great deep burst forth, the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were open, so that means that the entire crust of the earth began to break open, and the oceans that were underneath the crust began to burst forth. We're not talking flood like we understand today, where it just starts raining, it just doesn't stop raining. We're talking about the planet broke apart. Its original created self began to absolutely be shredded. And then you had the water that was a layer above. Now, how could it be that, where did dinosaurs go? What did all happen with that? Well, the answer is right here, because dinosaurs are reptiles as we understand it from their skeletal structures right now. And of course, we know that reptiles will continue to grow as long as they have enough water, have enough vegetation, and their skeletal systems can support themselves. So if you have a vapor of some sort of water around the planet that is on the outside, that would possibly create a higher barometric pressure on the planet itself. Then all of the water, it's like this beautiful greenhouse, really, where you've got the vapor on the outside, the water underneath the crust of the earth is so plentiful underneath there that it's just watering itself from beneath. And if you have that extra barometric pressure, you can grow bigger, longer, live longer. It's that extra layer of water is also protecting you from direct sunlight. So you've got this kind of a beautiful color that's always coming through the skies that would be pinkish. And so when we think about the flood, I think it's important to understand that the entire planet began to be changed and altered. It wasn't just, oh, it rained really hard for several days or for weeks, but it was something totally different than that. And our entire planet changed. The entire structure of the planet changed. And the earth broke open. It was crazy. It was loud. It was horrific. It was horrifying. And that's what it looked like right here. And everything changed. Where'd the dinosaurs go? Well, he may have had some on the ark with him that were the reptiles. When they got back off of the ark, the planet didn't sustain them quite the way they did. Or maybe we still have some remnants of the dinosaurs that are just different creatures, that maybe he didn't take every kind of dinosaur. I don't know that he would have taken a Triceratops, or maybe he would have not taken a Tyrannosaurus Rex. But anyway, so that would kind of give you a bit of a clue as to what happened, that they actually died in the flood. And the other thing about the understanding about, okay, so how can we, as scientific thinkers, believe in this idea of the flood? Remember what we talked about back at the creation is that all we have is evidence left over of what happened. No one was there, obviously, and the only writings that we have are writings like this that are ancient and many people feel like are unreliable. But it's interesting because every culture on the planet has a flood story, which would be considered a myth at this point. But isn't it interesting that of all the different myths that have come down through the generations, the flood story is one that it covers the entire planet, literally, the myth does, or the fable, or whatever you want to call it, that would bring, well, maybe it could possibly be true. But then when you look at the evidence on the planet, if you look at what we have left over, if you take the entire planet and you begin to break it open, and then all of this water is rushed onto the planet, what happens? I mean, you can do this in your backyard today with your kids. Grab some dirt out of your backyard and put it in a jar and shake it up, and then let it sit there for a couple of hours. And you're going to start beginning to see, even with that little jar of dirt, you're going to see layers coming up in that jar. how much more would it look like that whenever you have an entire planet that is being shaken up and stirred up, and then as it begins to silt away and dry, it's of course going to be in layers. And you say, well, what about the fossil record? Well, when you look at the fossil record, if you were to take that same planet and you were to shake everything up, the mammals would be floating, and so they would be toward the top. The crustaceans would continue to be at the bottom because they were oceanic anyway, or from the waters that were there. And isn't it interesting that there are shells on every single mountaintop in the world? There are seashells. And so when you look at the evidence, if we're not trying to have an argument, just looking at what is left over from what we have, if someone said, well, here's the evidence we have, everything is in layers, and you have all the mammals and these sorts of things are toward the top, and there are shells on every mountaintop in the world, it's really not that crazy of an idea that there was a worldwide flood, just as the word tells us there was. And that all the ancient peoples and all of the different ancient people groups have their mythology, as it were. They tell us that there was a flood. And so the planet doesn't argue with the fact that it could have happened that way. Instead of a millennial of silting that happened by natural means that we see today, what if it was sudden? What if it was cataclysmic? What if the entire planet broke apart? What if it happened that way? What if it's really true? Wouldn't that be awesome? On that very day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. Now, it took them 100 years to build the ark, for this family to build the ark. 100 years. And the New Testament says that gave Noah time to actually preach to the people of the earth, to say for 100 years to begin warning them. They had with them every wild animal according to its kind, all livestock according to their kinds, every creature that moves along the ground according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind. Now see, it's interesting because it's its kind. So this different genera, is it going to have every kind of this or every kind of that? Probably not going to have everything we see. But now we have poodles and we have German shepherds where there was just a flood dog that we were able to go ahead and manipulate the DNA to where some of it is, there's less DNA available in a poodle and in a German shepherd than there would have been in the flood dog. You see what I'm saying there? Pairs of all creatures that move in the breath of life and with the breath of life in them came to Noah and entered the ark. Again, it says they came to him. The animals going in were male and female of every living thing as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord shut him in. For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. So we do have evidence that is, they say it wouldn't have been possible, but if the entire planet changed, and the amount of water was underneath the crust, and the mountains weren't even really there until the crust began to break open. And if there was a barometric pressure on the planet around the entire planet and that water above had been disturbed, then even if the planet was just a tiniest bit smaller because of the extra barometric pressure, I'm just supposing here, from what the word tells us it may have looked like, then yes, it could have flooded the entire earth. And then the water would have receded and could never go back to those mountaintops again because those mountaintops were actually created during the flood. They rose greatly on the earth and high above the mountains under the heavens, and under the entire heavens were, all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The water rose and covered the mountains to the depth of more than 15 cubits. Every living thing that moved on the land perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out, people and animals and the creatures that move along the ground, and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him on the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Okay, then God remembered Noah. Oh my goodness, aren't we glad he did that? I go, oh, you forgot about him? God had thought of Noah. God remembered him. God knew him. God knew he was there. That idea of God knowing is the idea that we have here. So then, remember them and had thought of them, Noah and all the wild animals, the living livestock that were with him in the ark. And he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens had been closed. So you have that idea of the water that flooded the earth came from deep inside the earth. And there couldn't have been oceans, so there would have been rain before this. So even the oceans were underneath the crust of the earth. So think about the Pacific Ocean under the crust of the earth breaking forth. What would that have looked like? That's what it would have looked like. The water receded steadily from the earth, and at the end of 150 days, the water had gone down. And on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. Okay, it goes on down here and it talks about Noah checking to see if the water had receded enough for them to go ahead and leave the ark. So it was 370 days total. That's over a year that they were actually in the ark. And I think it's interesting because if I was to suppose what that would end up looking like, I'm not sure I would have had them on the ark that long. How long would it take it to dry? How long does it take things to dry out after you have a great flood? Nowadays, well, it's several days, but over a year, I don't know that I would have said that because it only rained for 40 days. That's not that long. So for these numbers to be this large when it comes to the time it took for the planet to go ahead and be safe enough for them to come out and for the land to be dry enough for them to walk on, I think that this would be probably, obviously it would be an accurate number, but I think if we were to try to figure it out, it wouldn't have been this big. Then Noah, I'm going to start at verse, let's go on over to verse 20. I want to make sure there wasn't something that I missed there. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. Interesting, because this is before the law, and he already knew what clean and unclean were. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is full of evil from childhood." Whew. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. What a covenant. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the sky, on every creature that moves along the ground, and on all the fish in the sea. They are given into your hands." So up until this point, the animals and man had a different relationship. So the entire planet is changed. You think about, well, why didn't Eve seem very surprised when the serpent spoke to her? Well, the fear and dread of us fell on to the beasts. Until that time, the relationship between man and animals was different. And the planet was different. Everything was different. The flood changed it all. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. See, I think it's interesting because you have the pre-flood world would have been full of all kinds of plant life. The nutrients would have been plentiful. There wouldn't have been areas, if you think about that kind of a situation, and the ground is being watered from the deep waters underneath, and there would have been no lack of food at all, no lack of nutrition. But as they're getting off of the ark, the Lord's saying, now you may need to eat the animals, which was a new thing. And many people who go back to become vegetarians, they go back and say, we want to live like they did in the garden where it was just vegetables. But after Noah, men began to eat the meat. Before that, they didn't. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. Interesting, because here in the United States even, they still drain the blood from the meat. And a lot of that comes back to this idea. And for your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from each human being too. I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. God is setting humans apart. And I think it's important for us to continue to understand that we are not equal with the animals. We are set above them because we were created in the image of God. When we stop believing that, it gets us all convoluted about what our place is on the planet. We are here to take care of the animals. We are here to help to subdue them, but they don't rule over us. We rule over them. It's the order of things. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind. It reiterates the creation story right there. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. It's important to understand right here that this word begins to be used, covenant. This is the first covenant that God has made with mankind. And covenant actually means cutting. So whenever Noah took and sacrificed these animals, it signified a cutting. Anytime the ancient peoples would come together and they would say, we're going to make a covenant between us, your tribe, my tribe, your family, my family, we're going to make a covenant. That meant we're going to make a cutting. We're going to sacrifice something. There's going to be a cutting between us. So there was a cutting between God and Noah. I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you and with every living creature that is with you, the birds and the livestock and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And that's true because it's not possible anymore. So God made a covenant and he means it. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you. I think it's so cool that God gave them a sign. I think that it's like I think it understands us so much that he knows that they needed a sign. A covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. I think it's beautiful because there you have the glory of the rainbow. And the Lord's saying, this is my promise. So anytime you see it. So they had never had a rainbow apparently before that because they'd never had rain before that. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all the living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all the living creatures of every kind on the earth. So God said to Noah, this is a sign of the covenant I have established between me and all the life on earth. Okay, I'm going to stop right there with this, and we'll talk about the rest of this chapter next week. But I also want to go ahead and let's talk just for a minute about the words of Jesus on this. Because we have this ancient story that has now become a huge, discussion about, did it really happen? Did it not happen? Is it possible? Is it not possible? Oh, it's not possible. The crust formed over the earth over millions of years. No, it didn't. It was the flood and it happened this way or that way. And it becomes this huge thing. And it's a huge thing among Christians, So do we believe it or do we not believe it? Is it even important to believe it? Is it important to care? Do I even care if the flood really happened or not? Because, we have what we have and it's what it is. And so why does it even matter? And I'm just going to go ahead and why does it matter? Well, let's turn on to Matthew chapter 24, verse 36. I want to go ahead and read here. This is in red, which means it was something that Jesus actually said according to Matthew. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels of the heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. So he's talking about his return. No one's going to know when it's going to happen. Only the Father knows. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. This is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be in the grinding with a hand mill, one will be taken, the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. So, he says right here that Noah happened. Jesus did. Jesus said that the flood happened right here. It's just what he's He's giving testimony about it. So as Christians, I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out there. Is it important to believe what Jesus said? Well, yeah, of course. If I'm a Christ follower, then I'm going to follow him and I'm going to believe what he said is true. I'm going to believe what he said when he said, I need to be kind to my neighbor. I need to pray for my enemies and love those who persecute me. And I need to, I need to give my life over to something greater than myself because God loves me so much. Do I believe Jesus? Do I believe him here? Is it important for me to believe in the flood as a believer in Christ? Is that important? Well, I think it's very interesting that he brings up the flood here when he's talking about his second coming. So do you believe he's coming again? He correlates the two and says it's going to be just like this. So in our hearts as believers, if we believe that Jesus is coming again, he says it's going to be just like the days of Noah. So is it just a farce? Is it just some made up thing? Jesus, we believe according to the word that he was in the beginning. It says in John, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Everything was made through him. So he was there. Jesus was the, we say, well, no one was there. Well, actually someone was there. It was Jesus. And he said, some thousands of years after it actually happened, that it happened. And he said, sitting right here, that and it has ended up being thousands of years later, that he would come again. And he will. But if we decide not to believe in the flood, where does that put us? And I'm not trying to shake your faith. I'm trying to encourage it. It's okay for us as intellectual Christians, as scientifically minded people, to say, you know what? It's a viable option. And Jesus said it happened. So I'm going to believe it because I believe him. You guys have a great day.